Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Shula Neuman. The St. Louis Cardinals are halfway through their season, and so far they've left fans less than impressed. But they still have a chance to improve. With me to discuss how the season is going and more is longtime sports writer Rob Rains of STLSportspage.com. Rob, hi. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Good afternoon.
Good. I want to also, before we get started, invite our listeners to get into this conversation. If you have a question, comment, or prediction for the ongoing baseball season you'd like to share, give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can send us a tweet at STL on air. You can email us at talk@stlpublicradio.org. So, Rob, I am going to say this up front. I love baseball. I love the Cardinals, but I rarely pay attention to their standings until after the All-Star break. So for everybody else like me.
Good for you.
Well, then, so you're saying I don't need to be paying attention before the All-Star break?
No, I usually don't look in for the first couple months of the season, to be honest with you, because it is such a long season. I mean, it's different than, football and even, hockey in a sense. When you're playing half the games, that you played in hockey. I mean, just look back at the Blues season, and we're all still celebrating the Blues winning the Stanley Cup. They had the worst record in the National Hockey League in early January. So, things just, I know those kind of things don't happen every year, but, I'm always been a, glass half full kind of guy instead of glass half empty kind of guy. So I look at the fact that, they're playing right about 500 baseball. We know they're not playing as well as they can play. We know some of the guys that have a long track record of success have not performed to that level so far this season, but they still have half the season to turn it around. And luckily for them, for the Cardinals, one of the biggest things that's going on is the fact that the Cubs and the Brewers, the other two main rivals in the NL Central, are not playing very well either. So we're still just 3 games, Cardinals are still just 3 games out of first place with half the season to go. And I think, but forget about the record. If I had told you back in April that the Cardinals would be 3 games out as we have head into the last week before the All-Star break, I think you would have taken that.
Maybe so. I have to say, though, you mentioned the Blues. They went from worst to best, of course. And so what do you think that the Cardinals have a chance ahead, at least of making it to October?
Yeah. Well, as I said, because I think there are 2 things working here. I mean, they have to have their key performers, the Matt Carpenters, Paul Goldschmidts, Paul DeYoungs. Those guys have to play better. I mean, they know that. I mean, Jack Flaherty has to pitch better. I mean, and they all know that. And if it comes down to a really, simply a matter of execution, if they do that, if they play better, up to the level that they're expected to play and that they have played at in the past, I think they'll be right there in the race, the rest of the season. If they don't, then there's probably not a whole lot you can do about it because you're not going to replace those guys. I mean, those guys are your foundation of this team, and they're going to be the foundation of this team going forward. So you just have to believe and expect that they're going to play better.
Yeah. Well, let's get into. We will get into some of these not so great moments when they haven't played so great. But what have the highlights of the season been so far?
Well, I think until he got hurt last week, Ozuna's performance has been really a positive. I think coming off, a year last year, which was kind of a transition year for him in the first year in St. Louis and stuff. I think, nobody really knew whether he would bounce back and play like he did in Miami, a couple of years ago, or play like he did last year. I think he was a pleasant, success story. It just didn't, especially with the fact that he didn't have an awful lot of guys playing well in front of him, still was able to generate a lot of, RBIs and a lot of run production. So, I think he's been a plus. I mean, I think, you look at it's kind of one of those weird years in that people have played well at different times. DeYoung played really well in April and then started struggling a little bit. So nobody, I think one of the problems has been nobody has really been consistent from start to, call finish. But I mean, to this point in the season, they've had hot stretches and they've had cold stretches. And unfortunately, they've been more cold than hot.
They need to all get on the hot is what you're saying. So
they need to get on the hot. Yes. They need, the thing is really that they have guys like Bader and Wong and some of those guys that have struggled offensively. But if the other guys, like we mentioned before, Goldschmidt, Carpenter, DeYoung, even put Molina in that class, if those guys were doing what Ozuna, when he gets back, if those guys are doing what they should be doing and what they're capable of doing offensively, you can live with, Wong and Bader not doing as well offensively because of the way that they play such great defense. But when everybody is not hitting, then you put a focus on every position and you look at those 2 guys and you say they're not carrying their end of the weight as well either.
So you mentioned a couple of the Cardinals that who are not performing well, Goldschmidt and Carpenter among them. Let's start with Goldschmidt. What's going on with him?
I just think he's, I always put this into this category, not just isolated on him, but anytime that a player makes a transition from a one team to another, and especially when they're going there under a new contract. I know he, had 1 year to go on his old contract, but he signed that new extension in spring training. That, that first year is just tough. I mean, whether you're trying too hard or trying to put too much pressure on yourself to succeed. I also think probably he wants to impress, his new town, his new teammates, his new, fans. And I think, plus when other people are struggling, I think that just puts more pressure on him to succeed. And unfortunately, to this point, he hasn't been able to play well. I mean, he's had a few moments here and there, but just, again, not the consistency that I think he would like. But he's got such a long track record of success and performance that I just think at some point here it's going to click, whether it takes, 1 game, 2 games a week or whatever to get hot to start that going. But he's one of the guys that I think really can be better in the second half of the season once he kind of just settles into his role and his new team and new surroundings and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to Carpenter, he's been in the leadoff spot.
Right. Yeah, he's hurt now too. He obviously wasn't playing well, and then now he's got a lower back strain, so they put him on the injury list yesterday. He'll be out till after the All-Star break. And the question is, with him, of course, there's it's been a long history of the fact that he's struggled in a couple times. They tried to move him out of the leadoff spot, but that just sets that leadoff spot just sets the tone for the entire lineup, especially at the start of a ball game. And when whoever it is, if the leadoff hitter is not playing well, it has a domino effect on the other positions and the other parts of the batting order. So I'm going to be curious to see when he comes back after the All-Star break if they immediately put him back into the leadoff spot or if they try to put him down in the order and bat him 6th or 7th for a couple of weeks at least and see if that can get him going.
Yeah. I want to go to another highlight, at least for me personally, of the season so far. That was Albert Pujols' return to Busch Stadium. I was there on the day that he hit the home run. But how would you describe the energy in the stadium the first day he came back?
It was electric. I mean, I mean, everybody had built it up to be such a dramatic moment and to be such a big story. And sometimes those things don't live up to that hype and to that degree of expectations, but it really did, because he was one of those guys that I think really expected a lot from, and he didn't disappoint. It was a magical moment. I think enough time had passed since he left the organization that all the I don't want to call them bridges that were burned, but just the bad feelings that existed at the time he left, we were able to forget about those and remember everything he accomplished in St. Louis and how much he meant to the city.
Yeah, I think it also really spoke well for the fans, the way that everybody was so excited. I mean, even when he got that home run, so that forgiveness was definitely there. I went to
and then the Sunday night game, he comes up with the bases loaded and the Angels already leading 2-0, and everybody thought, waiting for him to hit a grand slam. What happened here? Where are the Cardinal fans that want their team to hold them to 2 runs so they have a chance to win the game in the bottom of the 9th? So it was kind of crazy. It was kind of a weird juxtaposition of stuff going on that night.
Yeah, that's true. Mixed emotions, I think, is the right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to remind listeners that you can join this conversation if you have a question, comment, or prediction for the ongoing baseball season. We'd like you to share it with us. Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can also email us at stlpublicradio.org. Let's talk about Mike Schlitt as his time as a manager. It's been since last August. And in light of this season's trajectory so far, how do you think the Cardinals playing has changed under his leadership?
I don't think there's been any dramatic thing. I think it's just one of those cases that the situation is, the player's not performing well. I don't think it really has anything to do with the manager situation, because I think he's a very steady guy. He's a very calm guy. I've known him for a long time. As far as, when he was managing the minor leagues and stuff. And I think he was the right guy for the job. And I still think he's going to, long-term success there. I think he's just got to have, the players that he puts into position go out there and perform. They just got to go out there and perform. He's a very calm guy. He's a very positive guy. And I think he's, long-term, I think he's going to succeed in the job very well.
So getting players into the right position, though, does that mean that the Cardinals might need to make a trade? And if so, what?
There's some possibility about that. I mean, I think I had this conversation with somebody the other day at the ballpark. It was a scout from watches all the clubs, and so we were talking about the Cardinals and kind of the situation and what's going on so far with this club. And he said basically what it comes down to is we've got a team full of really nice guys, and these guys are all really good people. And I think but I don't know if that's the best solution for a team to win. They don't have anybody that really has a fiery edge to them. Somebody's going to go over there and spill up the post-game spread and yell and scream and, encourage people to play better in a very dramatic, forceful way. They just don't seem to have anybody like that. So I don't know if they need something to kind of shake them up a little bit like that and kind of take them out of their malaise. They kind of had, a moment like that a few years ago, leading up to the trade deadline, and they kind of pulled the big trade that nobody saw coming when they traded Alan Craig and Joe Kelly to Boston for John Lackey. And maybe they need some kind of a moment like that, because I don't know. I like the guys on this team a lot. I like the talent on this team a lot, but it does seem like there's just some kind of a spark or some kind of an edge that seems to be missing a little bit.
It's really interesting that you would say, like, the personalities of the players, that they're all just really nice guys, and somehow that would end up hurting them.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say, and I'm not in the clubhouse, not in the dugout, during games. I just know when I talk to guys and when I, see and observe, and I think they are a very good group of people, and that doesn't have any negative effect on meaning that they're bad baseball players. It just means, and I think they are very competitive and very hard-nosed and very much of a group that want to win, and I think it's a very cohesive group, a very tight-knit group as a team, but I just think, I don't know what it's going to take. Maybe it'll start tonight. Maybe something will just happen and they'll get on a roll and win, the rest of the games before the All-Star break, and then come out hot after the All-Star break, and we can forget we had this conversation. But and that's what I mean about baseball being such a long season that you just don't know when things are going to click and when things are going to turn around. And kind of your whole I guess goal at this point is just to stay within shouting distance until something positive happens.
Yeah. So yesterday, Rob, the Cards signed several international amateurs, some of whom they began scouting as soon as they were as young as 13.
Yeah.
Is this a good system?
I don't think so, and I don't think the Cardinals think it is either. It's just the way the nature, for whatever reason, Major League Baseball has allowed this system to become, they're allowed teams to get away with it, and the competition and both in terms of wanting to scout players and the number of teams involved and the money involved, they just have forced teams to get younger and younger when they start observing guys. And now that there are people signing. The Cardinals announced all these signings yesterday, but they've already got verbal agreements, and not just them, other teams too, with verbal agreements with players won't be announced as signing contracts until next July 2nd, and even maybe in some cases July 2nd of 2021. So those guys are, 14 or maybe even, at least no older than 15 that have agreed to contracts, in some cases, $1 million contracts. And I just think that's a bad system, and I think it will be addressed in the next collective bargaining agreement, which comes due at the end of the 2021 season.
Yeah,
I think they're going to go to an international draft very similar to what happens in the amateur draft. So you can't, it'll keep teams from having to make those decisions on players at such a young age.
Right. This seems like so much could happen between 14 and 18.
Well, to have them from 16, I think 16 is too young. But that's not going to change, because that's just the way it happens now with Latin players. And there are some positives to that, because now these kids that they signed yesterday, for example, I think there were 11 of them that were 16 years old. They'll get into the Cardinals have an academy in the Dominican Republic, which addresses things not just baseball instruction, but life lessons and instructions and English instructions and things like that. So there's a lot of classroom teaching, a lot of learning going on, that for a lot of these kids that formal education, especially in some of the more impoverished areas in Latin America, that they really don't have much of a formal school training education. So it's a really good environment for them to get in there and do that. And so they have a year or so where they're practicing and playing baseball, but not really kind of playing competitive games. They're just more in that kind of classroom setting. So I think that the 16-year-old age limit is a good thing as far as the Latin players are concerned. If they were to go to the draft, though, then you wouldn't have to worry about it. You could kind of evaluate guys when they're that age, but you wouldn't have to make a decision and actually offer them, that size of contracts because you wouldn't know for that point in the draft system until you actually drafted the guy that you were going to get him.
Right. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the All-Star game, which is happening next Tuesday. And the Cardinals only have one guy going this year, shortstop Paul DeJong. Right. He's heading to the 90th Midsummer Classic in Cleveland this year, as they call it. What sets him apart from his teammates?
Well, I think he's a very consistent player. I mean, I think it's one of those things that every team has to have a representative. So when you look at, the fact that Ozuna got hurt, I think Ozuna probably would have been the Cardinals guy. Maybe Young would have gone too. I don't know. They might have had two guys, but Ozuna was probably headed to the game until he got hurt. So if you look at other guys who have, kind of been there leading performers so far this year. And, DeYoung kind of stands out. And I think also the fact that, you have to weigh it against who's the players that are available from other organizations. So you had to have, you couldn't have, 6 shortstops or, 6 second basemen or something. So you had to have a representative number of players at each position. And then you just have to put all those things into the mix and into the equation to figure out, who should be the guy. And he was, obviously the best choice. I think Jordan Hicks would have had a chance to make the team as well until he got hurt and had to, miss the rest of the season and probably almost all of next year. So with the Tommy John surgery. So he was a kind of a benefit of a couple of guys who might have been selected ahead of him getting hurt and going down. But he's still a deserving player, and I think will go and acquit himself well at the game.
And, just to clarify for people, I guess this is a little backtracking, but, you're talking about all these balancing of who can be on and who can't not be on. Can you talk about the process of how the all-star players are selected? I know I go and I punch the holes.
Yeah, it's a fan vote for the starters. And then the players also have a vote, and then I think there's if a player's vote is for a player at like the top vote getter of a first baseman, if the player's vote is different than the fans' vote, then that player is elected to the team as well. And then whatever organizations are not represented by either the fan vote or the player's vote, then that's where they have to the commissioner's office steps in and picks a player from those teams to be on the team. And this year was the Cardinals and the Marlins were the two teams that in the National League that didn't have a player selected in either one of those votes. So they picked DeYoung and picked Sandy Alcantara, who was a pitcher with the Marlins, actually one of the guys the Cardinals traded to get Ozuna last year. So.
Okay. I have to say, I am a little upset that Harrison Bader is not considered a valuable enough player for the All-Star game.
He needs to hit better.
It does. This is true. One last question I have, going back to the regular season. How have the starters looked compared to the younger, more hungry players on the team, like Munoz and Tommy Edman? There's been criticism that the starters have been underachieving.
There have been. I mean, I think you could pretty much look around the whole lineup and say that all these guys have underachieved, except maybe for Ozuna. And maybe, in the balance of his season, DeYoung his numbers are probably about where you thought they should be at this point. They just kind of gotten there in kind of a weird fashion because he was so good for first month of the season and then not so good since then. But, and Dexter Fowler's been better, but not as good, I think, as some people would have hoped he would have been, but certainly better than he was a year ago. So, the rest of them, I think you would probably say they have underachieved. And I think for the most part, the starting pitching is probably a little bit underachieved as well. Michaelis has not been as good as he was a year ago. That probably was a little unrealistic to expect him to be that good because it was a, really special season that he had a year ago. Flaherty, I think, has struggled, with his command and pitch execution. So we saw it again last night, just make a couple of mistakes and can't get out of a jam, and then, I think Waino and Waka have been okay. Hudson's probably been their most consistent starter since the
Wait, Rob, I hate to do this. I have to interrupt you because we've run out of time. I have a tendency to do this, but I want to thank you, Rob Rains, for joining us today. It was really great talking with you.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Great. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
St. Louis Public Radio's The Gateway gives you the day's news first thing every weekday morning. From the ever-evolving relationship between St. Louis City and County to developments in the Missouri and Illinois state capitals and reports from our correspondents in Rolla and the Metro East. We put it all in a roughly 10-minute package with clarity and context. Download The Gateway wherever you get podcasts.